All right. Yay, recording. Cool. So today I wanted to chat about developing HTML and CSS and JavaScript as well, if you want, using the Chrome developer tools. And so there's this nifty little feature. So what I've got here is I just made a directory with some HTML files in it. We're just going to be working on a static site today. And so I'm going to actually use this node package called HTTP server that you just point it at a directory and it'll just serve whatever files are in that directory. And so it just starts serving them at this port, and you can just go there, and then the file that I have over here is being wow. So you may not know this as you're learning web development, but like the way web servers worked from the beginning was you just put static files in a directory, and they can be deeply nested, and then you point like Apache or Nginx at it, and it serves those files. And then later we figured out that we wanted to do some interactivity where we wanted to run code that would dynamically define some content. So we had a special area for that called CGI scripts, where only some URLs that you went to would actually launch like a Perl program or something, and it would dynamically respond with some dynamic content. That has changed, and now most of the web apps that we build are just entirely dynamic. Every URL that you go to is sent to your Express app or your Rails app or whatever, and we dynamically decide what to do. Even if we're serving static pages, there's still a program that's like deciding that. If we're going back to basics and we just want to play around with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we can just use kind of an old school approach where we're just serving static files. So HTTP server is pretty nice. This -c-1 flag that I have here, I believe, is a cache timeout. So this web server will load the files into memory and not have to read them off the disk, so it's conserve them faster. And I'm disabling that because I'm developing, so I don't want there to be a caching layer in between what's actually in my file and what's being sent to the browser. So that's what's going on in my bottom terminal here. And now we can see what's going on here. So I'm going to try to hook up this. Oh yeah, Sal, what's up?
-c, that's the one that but you have -c-1 to disable it?
-c-1. It says right here. Oh, I'm eating. It says right here to disable caching, use -c-1. Because that's like -1, right? So this is cache for 10 seconds. This is cache for -1. That's just a way to say disable. I don't know why 0 isn't disable. Because like cache for 0 seconds, it sounds like not caching to me. Okay. I'm going to try and set up this feature that I haven't set up before, where if we link to our script tag, and we link to our CSS, put something in there. Let's do salmon. Cool. We should be able to come in here and modify this file and have it actually persist. But that didn't work right off the bat. You can come in here and modify the actual file here, and it will live update the page, but there's a way to link to these actual files so you can do your development in here. I did do this earlier, trying to do this. But there's a way to like link these, and I might have to look it up because I thought I would remember, but I do not. So I'm going to do this add folder to workspace, and here's the folder that has my stuff. I have to give it permission. And now I can come in here and I can edit these files and it should persist, and then I can reload the page. But I'm not getting that live updating at the same time, and I want both. So I have to reload. Because what you want to be able to do is come in here and say, okay, this H1 element, let's say we had some styles on it, and I want to change that style. I want to be able to use this tool to select an element, come in here and say, these should be green. That's not a thing. Yeah, thanks. This should be green, and have that actually update the file and make that change. What's up?
Make it stop.
Make it be, yeah, that looks awful, right?
So
Yeah.
hard to look at.
Yeah.
Ooh, Christmas in July. Wow.
There we go. How about that?
Oh. Ooh. That's amazing.
Getting real. All right, let's look it up. Edit local files in Chrome Developer Tools. Save the file, undo your mistakes. Why is step 4 undo your mistakes? Like, you're gonna fuck it up, so step 4, undo. Oh my god, this is like the oldest article in the world. Here we go, set up persistence. Add workspace. Here we go, map file to system resource. That's what I want. So sources, map file. Ah, here we go. This is the JS thing here. No, this is the HTML. I'm gonna map this to here. Well, why did these get unmapped? Crazy. Okay. So if we come in here now and change this to orange, or change this to, I don't know, black. Does it change my file? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. Did everybody see that? Woo! Cool. So we can do like a lime. There we go, and it edits that local file. And then we can come in here and say,
Oh, it is like it's really. Oh no! Who's summoned the Pedor?
all right, here we'll slow it down.
Okay. Not helping. DJ.
Not helping? Yes, exactly. DJ Dom. So slow right now. Let's make it even slower.
We're gonna really.
Okay, the soundtrack. That sounds awful. No R. Kelly. That, yeah. Let's make that HTML tag. Okay, cool. All right, so that's basically the basics of this little setup. Is that as you're working on some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we're not often in this kind of environment where we're just working with static files. Like the vast majority of the web stuff you'll make will be dynamically generated in some way. So this kind of environment is best for like testing out things in kind of a clean room, right? One of the things that I find really challenging, I think most people find really challenging about CSS, is that it's pretty easy to accidentally have some bleed over where like you've got a style that's meant to do this for this element and it's actually affecting a child because it cascades down. And oftentimes you're trying to get something to work and it's not working, and you're not, at least I'm not sure all the time that it's it's not something else changing my environment in a way that like I expect this thing to float the way that it, or position the way that I'm used to, and it's not happening that way, and I'm not sure if it's something else that's messing me up, right? So if I'll often go into a clean room environment like this and try to make something work in way less complex of an environment. And then when I have that thing working, I can bring it back into my more complex environment and realize like, oh, this other style was cascading down, and that's what's changing. So I actually find I use this quite a lot. I honestly never set up the like local editing thing because I'm used to just going back and forth. But this can be really nice when you're trying to debug something and you come in here and you make 5 or 6 changes on elements, and then that just persists right in your file, and you can just save that. So that's the high level of what I wanted to show. And then if we want to spend the rest of the time in this talk, I was going to just go through some of the like layouts and components in some of the phase 1 modules and sort of build a layout and put a component in there and kind of show you how I would structure things.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Any questions about this setup? Yeah, Sal?
Would this work once I here you set up a server to have that render like every time you make a change, but then would that work?
No, it's not doing anything every time I make a change. The HTTP server that I set up, that's just serving files. That is just on port 8081.
Gotcha. Would that work if you just like have like an index file that's like for
I think so. Let's find out. I generally don't do that. The question that Sal had was, I've got these files in this directory, and if I just open this HTML file directly in the browser, can I do this local editing thing? And I assume so. Let's find out. If I go here, wow, I'm not even seeing the source here. I think you'd have to set this up again. You'd have to go to sources and like map again. But it looks like it works, yeah. Now, we're not seeing my amazing styles because the way I linked. The reason why I never do this, I never do web stuff from file : // The web is for a number of reasons, but the main one is like pathing is different. Absolute and relative paths change. You can't use absolute paths effectively, and you have different security constraints. There's even more security constraints on local files than there is on a served thing. As far as I've remembered, I've run into all these security issues. So like, I never do the file thing when I always start a server. And the reason I do that is a number of things, but here's a main one, is when I link to my assets, I like to do only absolute paths to my assets, because that way this HTML, it doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter what path it's at, there's no relative pathing I need to keep track of. It's just these files, my resources, the JavaScript and the CSS are just always at / something. They're always absolute accessible. So that's why if you run a server, then you can just say /index.js and it'll get you to. So it doesn't matter if this page, so to give a more concrete example, if I made a directory called about, and inside of about, I put in index.html, and I can link to my assets exactly the same way. So when I'm doing a more complicated web app, where I'm doing rendering, I can use templates, and those templates don't need to know anything about the current page and where it's at. They know where the assets are. They're absolutely linkable, and we don't need to worry about relative pathing. Cool. So then I can go to /about. And if I had used relative paths, right? So on the home page, I could do like, you know, // or how about, well, let's try both of those. So both the CSS and the JavaScript assets worked being linked with relative URLs here. Right? But if I were to take this same code and try to run it on a path like the About page where you're nested under one directory, those links would not work because they're trying to go to /about/index, right? So in order to stay consistent, I just always put an absolute path, and then that works in it should work in all locations. About page, and it should work on this page. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so let's move into some actual developing of some CSS. Because I'm doing this with just static files, I'm probably going to make more than one CSS file and maybe more than one JavaScript file, and I'm just going to link to all of them. But if I were to do this in the real world, I would be using something like Webpack to like suck all those files into one asset, right? Does that part make sense? So I'm gonna forego that, but in the real world, we almost always will do that. Yeah, so.
Can you explain more, please, on the last part?
Like,
why would you have multiple CSS files?
Because it's gonna get massive, right? I'm gonna be building a 2-column layout and some sort of modal and like a tab system and all kinds of, like, just picture anything, right? Like if we look at like Bootstrap, right? This is a decent starting place for like an internal app that you don't want to build a bunch of CSS for, but it's also a good example of just like the world you might live in if you worked at like Pinterest or picture Instagram, whatever, or they're not a website, but picture a complex website like Facebook's the off the charts complicated thing. Like they have just like probably billions of lines of JavaScript components that whole site. But like you look at a complex site like Pinterest and you're going to have a ton of components, a ton of individual building blocks to build your website. So if we look at Bootstrap as an example of that, we just have all this stuff. We've got headings and buttons and forms and tables and images and all kinds of stuff, right? And we don't want to put that all in one giant file. Bootstrap does come downloaded in one big file, but you don't want to develop that in one big file. It's just unruly to be scrolling around a 20,000 long line file and be modifying things, right? So if you look at the source for Bootstrap, it's going to have everything broken out into a bunch of files, and that eventually all gets compiled down into one file.
What about the CDN version?
That's just a post-compilation version, right?
Post-compilation?
Yeah. So it's all minified through compilation, and all that's just the end build artifact. But all the source is all separated out into files. I think we could even probably go to npm. Ugh, go away. And look for. Actually, I bet it's just on GitHub.
Is that Kanye?
Huh?
Is it Kanye?
Boot. I assume this is the right Bootstrap. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so this is the source for Bootstrap. This is version 4, and you can see they write Bootstrap using SCSS, which is kind of like Sass, but it's just basically a superset of CSS that allows you to do things like nesting and have variables and all these other features. But you can see like all this breakdown. Right, so if we look at the initial file, Bootstrap SCSS, here's where they're importing all these other files, and it all gets concatenated together, right? So they start with some functions and some variables and some mix-ins and just some useful tooling, and then we start getting into some like styling of images and the grid system and stuff like that, right? So this is not, Bootstrap was made for tools where you don't want to write CSS for them and you don't really care what it looks like. You just want it to look not awful, right? And it's gotten really popular, and people have started using it for like their actual production, like company website. And I don't think it was ever intended to be used for that. It's fine to use for that, but most companies that you work at are going to have some basic foundation of some reset style sheet or whatever sort of basic layout they've configured, and then they're going to be building their own components, styled their own way. And if they're organized well, you're going to have things broken up into a bunch of different files and having them all compile together. So again, I'm not going to be doing that for this exercise. I'm just going to put things in separate files, and we'll just pretend that they were concatenated together, because I'll just put a bunch of CSS files here and in the right order, and we'll pretend that we're later going to move this to a concatenation.
Okay, you just said in the right order.
The order matters, yeah. The order of CSS and JavaScript matter in terms of how they're executed, and in terms of CSS, the order matters in like selector weight. So here we'll get into that. Hold on to that question, and I'll show you an example once we have some code to play with.
I think that goes into some other questions.
Okay, cool. So let's look at an HTML 2-column layout. So this is an example of a 2-column layout, right? Like we should see this pattern on a bunch of different websites. So, stop it. Okay, so this is where it becomes awesome to be a web developer, because you're like, you want to modal this whole page. Oh, okay, it went away. Great. So look at this page. This is a single column. I'd call this a single column layout, because we've got one big column in the middle, and then inside of that we have like kind of a newspapery, no surprise, sort of layout, right? And this actually came from newspaper layouts. This idea that we're going to lay things out in columns, right? And so the web has adopted that a little bit. Things have changed with some more flexible layout systems, but this is one example of a 1-column layout. I think Facebook, I can't go to Facebook, I'm not logged in. I should have some better examples, but hopefully as you're looking at different websites, you'll notice that they have shapes like this, right? You've got a header and a footer, maybe a nav bar on the left, and some main content, right? You might have some other more complicated layouts, like a 3-column layout, which isn't listed here. And there's something called the golden layout or something like that. I think this is now just a framework called that. Well, anyway, there's all kinds of them. Layout. So here's another example of someone creating. Now this is an interesting layout, because you've got 3 columns, and you want the footer to be at the bottom, and you want these columns to, sometimes you want these 2 columns here to be as tall as the tallest column. That's sometimes a requirement of your layout, right? So anyway, there's all these challenges and all this content that you can find on how to accomplish specific layouts. I'm just gonna whip up this little 2-column layout like this. So I'm gonna start with this index CSS, and I'm actually gonna start with a reset style sheet. Does everybody know what a reset style sheet is? Okay. I think I'm gonna do normalize. This is the one that I think Bootstrap also uses, normalize CSS. So let's look at it. Makes browsers render all elements more consistently and in line with modern standards. Precisely targets only the styles that need to be normalized. So what's really going on here, if we look at this style sheet, and I'm just going to find normalize on a CDN so I can just link to it in my HTML here. I'll just put it as my first style sheet. So but we're going to look inside of it. And what's going on in here is basically every single browser vendor. So different versions of Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, whatever browsers, Safari Mobile, Chrome Mobile, Firefox Mobile, right? They're all going to have a default style sheet that says what the fact that a div is inline block and a span is excuse me, a div is display block and a span is display inline. That comes from the default style sheet. And all browsers are supposed to be the same, but it turns out they're not. And some browsers render buttons differently than other browsers. And some browsers render the HTML tag or have a different default line height. And so this comes in and says the body has no margin and overwrites whatever the default style is. So if there's a different body margin in Chrome than there is in Firefox, you're going to end up having to deal with that, and it's going to have side effects. So this is some team of people spent a lot of time going through the default style sheets of all these browsers and figuring out a way to like bring them all together to be the same. And so a ton of work has gone into this with like test suites distributed across all kinds of different browsers and making sure that specific example HTML and CSS renders exactly the same. So you almost always are going to want to use something like this because you're going to want to level the playing field basically across all browsers. So I'm just going to link to this. If I was doing this in a real application, I'd probably, if it was a Node app, I'd probably install the Node module and link to it that way and slurp it into my giant compiled style sheet. But I'll just do it here. And we're not seeing any change, but let's go to the network tab, and it is, maybe I didn't say, oh, I'm on the about page, yeah. Home page, there we go. So you can see how if I get rid of this, there's actually a little bit of padding or margin on the body here. So that gets rid of that. And the only reason the text isn't touching the top is because this is an H1, and H1s have margin top and bottom. But now our body has no mistake. So we always want to do a reset style sheet. And then, so now let's work on this layout. So we're going to do something like a header, or actually I'm going to call, yeah, let's call this a header, and then a footer. And then we're going to call this the main content. And inside of main, I'm going to put a nav on the side. And then in here, we'll just put a div class page content or something like that. So I've just taken like a first stab at what I think will get us towards something like this, right? So here's my header, here's my footer, this will be the side nav, and this will be the main page content.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that on the main page, there's a navigation?
Yeah, I just called this page content, but I could have called it anything. But
yeah. So, yeah, I guess why did you use the main tag?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like, main is just a tag that's available that I personally only use as like a main element. But like, honestly, this could have just been like a div with a class of some other thing.
Right.
I just I plan to only use header, main, and footer. But honestly, if I was planning on having this website be extremely complex, I probably would at least give these specific class names, and maybe so at that point I might just use divs with specific class names that are unique, because maybe someone else wants to use a header tag somewhere else, and now my styles are going to apply to that too. So we do have to think about, like, are we limiting the usefulness of things by not giving them specific class names, right? Well, let's just start with this, and then when things get more complex, we can always add a class name and change our styles. Cool. So let's go in here and use this cool thing. So we've got our header, and we've got our main, and our footer, and our nav. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to give a style to this element. I'm going to hit plus. And then I'm going to say this thing's background color should be purple. And I think I would see that if there was any height on it. But if you hover over this, you can see like up at the top left here, it says 584.57x0, right? It's got 0 height.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give this header a min height of like 100 pixels just to start out. And I'm hoping this is saving in my style sheet, but I don't think it's going to. Because it says inspector style sheet. So let me just come in here. I'm going to get rid of this stuff now that I have a normalize. I'm going to say that my body element has a background color of lime, just in case we see it. And then my header has a background color of purple. And a min height of 100 pixels. And then my, let's see, footer.
Is line a color?
Lime is a color. Oh, not line. Lime is what I want. And then we'll do this min height. Yeah, line would be a terrible color.
Yeah.
Okay, and then inside main, we've got nav and page content. So I'll do nav here and page content. And we'll do something like this. Oh wow, it did live refresh.
Yes.
That was crazy. That must be because we hooked up that Chrome thing. Okay. So here's what we got. This is our footer, the orange one. This is our page content. This is our nav, and this is our header. And then in the background here, we have this is the body element. So this isn't exactly what we want. The first thing I'm going to do is get the nav on the left and the main content on the right. And I'm going to come in here and say, and just put some text to make it a little easier to see what's going on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to use Flexbox to get these two block level elements, the nav and the div, to flow left and right. So I'm going to do that on the main. And so in the main object, which I didn't style, I'm going to do display flex. And then flex direction is going to be row because I want those things to be columns. There we go. And then for the nav, I want this to be flex grow 0 and width 100 pixels. And then we're going to do flex shrink 0 so that it doesn't change sizes. But then the page content, we're going to change this to a 1, and now it should flex. So it's going to take up the remaining content while the nav should stay at 100 pixels.
That's good. So a question. So you were able to put display flex once, and that's just in main because nav and page content?
The main element is display flex. The nav and the page content are just internal elements that are just display block. You only need to use flex on that outer wrapping element. But then you can, inside the children, tell them how they're supposed to grow. Cool. Sweet. Yes?
Can you explain a little bit further the flex grow and flex shrink property? Just like the nav versus the...
Yeah.
What exactly is going on there?
The shrink 0 says that this thing should not, the nav should not grow or shrink. No matter how I change the window size, it does not grow or shrink. But the page content,
The blue thing's the nav.
yeah.
Purple thing's the header.
Okay.
Is this not readable? This
My
text?
eyesight is bad.
Got it. Okay. So then the page content element here is going to grow and shrink. As you can see, it is growing and shrinking right now.
Okay,
Yeah?
that makes
Cool.
sense. I thought that the purple was the nav.
Nope, that's the header. Yeah. Okay.
The text white.
There you go. Okay.
It's magic.
Ugh, it's ugly. Okay. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Nope.
Bigger.
All right.
Make it ugly.
It gets fancy on us.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But we still see this lime background, which we shouldn't see, right? And so that's because we need the nav and page content, which is wrapped in the main element. We need that main element to also grow vertically because we want the footer to stay at the bottom, right? So even if there isn't enough content in here to push this stuff down, which I'll show you, if there was actual page content, so I'll put a p tag in here with a bunch of text, and we'll make a bunch of those. So now you can see that the footer is at the bottom. The fact that you're seeing a little green over here is because of the zoom thing. It's not the lime. So I'm actually going to change that background color to, I don't know, salmon. There we go. So we don't see any of that, and that's because the content is bigger than the page. If we were to shrink the page here, you'd see that salmon background again. And that's showing us that this main element, the blue and red main element, is not growing to take up the remainder of the space on the page. So we're going to do that the same way we did the other one with Flexbox. So we're going to say that the body is display flex and that the header is flex, grow, and shrink 0 because we don't want it to grow. The main is going to be grow 1, and then the footer is going to be grow 0. And then we also need to say flex direction row, no, column, because we want those to show up as rows. And that didn't work. And that's because, so check this out. Even though this is actually a quirky thing about browsers that I find, which is that the body element and the HTML element are often treated with some special cases. So for example, we said the body's background color salmon, right? And that's what we see here. But when I hover over the body, it cuts off. The body element as it's being rendered is being rendered a little weird here. It's actually not visible in some sense, even though we're seeing the salmon here. And I think I see this quirky stuff only on the body element. It's because if we go here and to say that the body's height, the body's min height is 100% of the page or 100 view heights, now we're fine. So sometimes what I'll do if I find that there's quirky behavior going on is I'll just take the entire content of what's in the body and I'll nest it under one element. I'll just put a div and I'll just call that like entire page or something like that. And then I find that quirky thing where the background color is being rendered but the element is not in some half and half sense goes away. In this case, I think this is going to work. This is also another thing that I've found that I often need to do is tell the body element that it should always take up at least the full viewable side of the page. So those are two tricks to keep in mind there.
Is it better to use one trick versus the other?
I find I've been doing CSS and HTML for more than a decade, and I still have to play around with things. I still have to come into to a clean room like this and figure out. So when I did probably 4 major entire site redesigns when I worked at change.org. That's just something they'd love to do. Like every 6 months, they were like, we're going to redesign the site from scratch. And so I had to go in and like make new layouts. And we still had all this existing CSS. We weren't going to throw it all away, but we were going to refactor a bunch of it. And when I was trying to do like, okay, now we're doing a 3-column layout, I would find that it was difficult to get it to work within the context of this pre-existing massive thing. So I'd go into a clean room, lay it out like this, get that to work, and then I'd start bringing in piece by piece parts of our giant CSS pile that we had accumulated and see what was messing with my layout. So I find that you may have to use 2 hacks to get something to work. Obviously, 1 hack is better than 2, but it's going to be trial and error. All right, so we've got our 2-column layout here. And for some reason, Google thinks lorem ipsum is Latin, and that is not true. Never translate Latin. Sounds great. Cool, so we have our layout. One of the things what might be nice on this page content is to put like some padding to just pad things a little bit. Cool. All right, so let's build some stuff. Let's build some components. Let's first get rid of some of these styles. Now that we've used our contrasty colors to get our layout the way that we want, I'm going to come in here and get rid of some of that. So I'm going to say the header is going to be background black, color white, and I'll do that for the footer. And then we'll get rid of this and this, and we'll get rid of our salmon. Cool, and then maybe our nav will be a gray or something. Great. And I'm going to get rid of this text shadow. Cool. Let's make the header a little shorter. And the footer even shorter. This live reloading thing is actually kind of cool. I've never actually set this up before. I just seen it done. It's actually kind of cool. Okay. So inside of our header, we'll probably do something like let's tackle doing a horizontal list of links, right? So generally, when we have a list of things, folks want to do like an OL or a UL, right? Because we have a list. So I'll do an unordered list with some LIs, and then inside of that will be an A tag that go to different pages. So we'll call this home. There we go. And then we'll make a couple of these. We'll make one for the about page. And we'll make some other ones that we actually don't need these to go anywhere. So if I click on them by accident, I don't want them to go anywhere, but just make a few of these.
Contact. Oh.
Well, we might put that in the footer. Okay, cool. So this is what we get by default, is we get a vertical list like this. So oftentimes I'll make a class called an inline list. And so, whoa, go away.
Maybe click on more.
Optimize for full screen video clip. Nobody knows what that does. All right, hopefully that'll go away. Cool. So then down here, I'm going to start. This will be my first like CSS component, right? When I think about building stuff on the web, I think about from the CSS perspective, there's kind of 3 kinds of CSS. There's sort of your boilerplate layout CSS, which actually we might reclassify, but let's just say that's what I would call like you're just sort of getting your foundation of your CSS setup. What's the default font size on your document? What's the default font family, right? And that sort of foundational stuff. Then you've got like sort of utility classes, right? So in this case, we just want to create a list, and we want to call this list a certain kind of list. This is going to be an inline list. So this is one thing. The only component to this, there's not going to be any paired HTML to this. You just any OL or UL that you want to slap this class on, we'll try to make it inline, right? So that's like a utility class. Another way we might have a class called important or something, or strong or something like that, and that might just be for making your text look red and bold or something like that. But then we also will have another perspective, which is like a complex component, which is going to have some CSS with some very specific HTML. So you're probably going to have that in like a partial or a dedicated template. So let's say we're making like a slideshow, right? So we're going to say, okay, here's an array of images, render a slideshow, whatever that is. And so a slideshow component is going to have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and they're going to all be sort of married to each other and packaged as a single component. Right? So we'll get to a complex component like that, but this is more of like a utility class. So the first thing we want to do for inline list is we want to get rid of the list style type. So I'm going to say it's no list style type. And I think that gets rid of your bullets here. And then let's start using these tools in here, and we'll edit in Chrome. So we want this thing to be inline. So why isn't it inline? Let's find out. Can anyone look at the styles on the right here and tell me why these LI elements? Well, it's sort of a trick because we've got this special display that no one uses, list item as a display. No one uses that. I'm not actually sure. This is that user agent style sheet I was talking about. This is the default for Chrome that would be overwritten by our reset style sheet if it was necessary, but they haven't done that. That's what I think is why we're getting this. So if we were to say inside of an LI style sheet, any immediate children that are LIs, we're going to say display inline. And now those things, so now we see that the LI inside the inline list is display inline. Yes?
I've never seen that syntax on line 52 where you can do.
What, this arrow?
Yeah.
No, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyone know what that arrow means?
It's
The greater than?
a CSS selector.
It's a CSS operator, yeah.
Operator, yeah. And so what it's saying is that inline list is the parent element, and LI is the child element. And so anything with the parent element with the class name inline list, those child elements will now be displayed inline.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. But I'll also add, and I see your question in the back there. You should try reading CSS selectors from right to left, because that's how the browser pretty much does it. So if we think about this as a list of constraints, right? We're going to look at every element on the page, and we're going to start cutting away the ones that don't apply, right? So you've got to be an LI element, okay? And that's what this means. Then this means your immediate parent, your direct parent, not your ancestor up the tree, has to have the class inline list, right? Another way, if we flip it and think about it left to right, inline list, immediate children, immediate descendants, not your grandchildren, right? That are LIs, right? So this means that I can have an LI. So let's say I have another list inside of this LI that doesn't have this class, and then I have an LI in there, right? So this style that I wrote only applies to the immediate children of this element. It will not apply to this LI because that's an ancestor, or not an ancestor, that's a grandchild. That's a farther down descendant. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of operators in CSS. There's a bunch of them that mean all kinds of stuff like neighbors and all kinds of things. So you should go and look at the W3, or you can just look anywhere. Just do CSS operators.
Yeah.
And W3 School is going to have a big list for you. There's a bunch of operators that you can use. You should go familiarize yourself with these. They're very useful. Question in the back still?
Oh, I was just gonna. I think that answers it. I was wondering what the difference is between using that operator and simply saying class list, but it sounds like it's.
Well, we don't have any
all the
elements.
lists.
We don't have any elements with we don't yet to create a class name list.
Well, no, what I mean is you're able to just whatever that class name was. You
What
can
class
just
name?
say
You mean
Inline list?
you mean
class name inline list, and then you can say all the lists within it, but
all the
that would have
LIs
to
within it?
But then now, without the operator, if there was just a space there, it would be all the list elements.
Descending all the way down,
Yeah,
yes.
instead of just that.
Exactly. And I want to be able to put a UL inside of my inline list, right? So there's that. Cool. So that's why I did it that way. And then there's another style that I want to put on here that I'm going to say this should be a separated list. And so I'm going to create another utility class that says for all the LI elements, they're going to have a an after pseudo class that's going to have the content of a pipe, and I'm trying to put some separators. So I'm going to put an after that is not the last child. Does that work? No. Oh yeah. Wait. We need to put this before the after. There we go.
You can change the color of the text.
Sure. So let's get a better default for our A tags, where an A with an href is going to be color inherit. There we go. Yes.
Are these operators pretty new to CSS? It seems like they're something that people used to use things like Sass for. Like, am I understanding that right? Like Sass, I thought the benefit of Sass is that it had all these operators.
No, that's not the benefit of Sass. Sass doesn't bring any new operators. There's no way Sass could create new ways to target elements, right? It all has to boil down to real CSS anyway. So all Sass's major feature is it allows you to do nesting and a bunch of other complicated expressions that say like these 3 class names all inherit these shared styles, and it compiles that all for you. But at the end of the day, you just get normal CSS, right? These selectors here, like not and last child, are just parts of CSS that are supported differently in different places. So you got to use something like can I use to look at last child, and we see that nth last child is listed here, but not last child. Here we go. All these CSS selectors are grouped into here, and they're supported by everybody. So last child is supported everywhere. But if we wanted to use nth last child, and I don't even know what that means, that's not very widely supported. What about the not selector? So the not selector that I used here, that flips something, it's actually not very well supported. It says it's not even supported in Chrome, even though it's working here. Selector list, not A. So I probably wouldn't use the not selector if I was worried about site compatibility across all these browsers. Another way to do this without using the not is to do something like this. We're just going to say all LIs, and then we're going to provide another style that undoes that, basically. I think this will work too. There we go. So I'm just saying all the LIs have this pipe after them except for the last child. Yeah. So that's probably another way to do it. Okay, cool. So now that we have some content in our header, I'm going to stop fixing its height. And now its height's just going to be based on what the content is. And then maybe the header will have like a slightly off-white. So I'll just put this in here, but then I'm going to go pick a better color. There we go, like a nice off-white. Cool. All right, so that's an example of just like some utility classes that we can kind of use wherever we want. We can put lists wherever we want, and we can say that they're inline, and we can say that they have this little separation bit, and now we have these 2 little classes. Cool. So now let's build something that's a little bit more complex, that's going to require both HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that all have to match up. And so I'm going to build tabs. So inside of our main content here, I'm going to create like a tab sort of thing. So inside here, we're going to say div class equals tabs. And then we're going to need another div that is the tab that we'll call a tab. And this will be like, we'll make this a button, and we'll make this just tab A, and tab B, and tab C, and then there's a million different ways to do this, and it's been a while. Okay. So I am going to take one of these p tags and put them inside here. And wrap this in an H3. There we go. Okay, so we're seeing the tab content for all these, and we only want to see them for the one that's selected, right? So we're going to put data-selected here. And let's do some styles for this. So first off, everything that I'm going to do is going to be nested within this tabs. I'm going to call this tabs, and so this is going to be a, I like to prefix everything, so I'm going to call this a tabs tab. And then this is going to be a tabs tab content. So now all of these class names are prefixed with tabs, and so I've kind of given myself like carved out a little bit of space, right? Nobody else should be creating a tabs dash style unless it's related to this component. So in CSS and HTML, we don't have any way to compartmentalize things. There's no way to say that like that these styles only apply within this context. Every style that you define is essentially a global class name. It's a global CSS selector that applies to the entire document, right? So if you want to scope things, you're gonna have, the best way I've found to do that is just through namespace scoping, where you just in practice make sure that you give yourself some logical namespacing. So if out of context you were just like, what is tabs tab content? You can look in your style sheet and infer that this is related to the tabs component because this is in a file called tabs and everything's prefixed with tabs. And so it should provide a little bit more structure. But this is just the way I like to do it. There's a lot of structures out there like object-oriented CSS and God, what's the other one that's really popular? I can't remember. Anyway, there's another one that's really popular. You've probably seen it if you've seen something where they do like, they'll do like tabs dash dash tab underscore underscore selected or something. And they have some pattern that like dash dash means like this is a component and this is a subclass and then this is an augmenter to that class. Like that, there's systems that people have defined because CSS is just like a pile of global stuff. Pile of global class names, and so we need to provide, you're going to want to provide some additional structure. So be prepared to look for that additional structure when you look at existing projects or you start your first gig. They're going to hopefully have some logic, some additional structure applied to their style sheet. So I'm just going to do that with some prefixing. So that's why this class name may seem a little weird. Okay, cool. So let's start out with the tabs tab. Well, any of the tab contents, I'm just going to start with a good old display none, so that none of them are displayed. And just to be clear, I'm going to get rid of these other p tags. Cool. But one of them is going to be selected, so I'm going to start with one of them open. So I'm just putting a data dash selected. And does anyone not know why I'm putting the data dash prefix on these? Okay, so you can't just put any old attribute on any old element, right? There's a specific prescribed. You can, and the browser's not going to throw any errors, and it's still going to work. But according to the spec, you're not allowed to just say, you know, frog equals 43 on a div. If you want a custom attribute, then you need to put data dash in front of it. And that's what the spec for HTML prescribes as the way to put your own custom attributes. So data dash selected, there's no such thing as a button being selected in the browser by default, but these are tabs and I want to have some concept of selected, so dash selected. And then when the content is the paired content element will also be selected. And this is what we're going to later do in our JavaScript. When I click B, we're going to take the selected tag off of the two A elements and move them to the B elements. So I'm planning to do that. So what I'm going to say is in my CSS, if there is a tab element that has data selected as a property, then this is going to switch this to display block. And so now we're just displaying tab A. We'll do the same thing for a tab's tab button, where if you have data selected, then you'll just be like background color red or something like that. So let's style these things a little bit. Let's give them a border of 1 pixel solid black with a border radius of 5 pixels and a top right radius of 5 pixels. Now they're looking like tabs, yeah? And when they're selected, instead of red, I'll just put dark gray. And we'll say this is normal gray. Okay. There we go. Okay.
And if you wanted to use the hex code for gray, hashtag 89899.
Good for you.
And that's for both gray, GRE and GRA.
Oh.
Yes, GREY and GRAY are both legits. Does this work too? Can you be like color or whatever the English people are doing? Okay, and then we've got tabs, which I'm actually gonna give these content things. I'm gonna give a border 1 pixel solid black as well, and a padding of 1 EM. Here we go. How about a padding of, cool, all right. So there we go. These actually things need a border bottom none. Hey, we're looking like tabs, right? And then the selected one, here's a little trick. The selected one is going to have a border bottom of 1 pixel solid gray. And then we're going to do margin, or we're going to do position relative top -1 pixel. That didn't work. That's not what I wanted. Maybe margin top -1 pixel. Still messing with the other one though. How about we do outline bottom? No, that doesn't work either. So, nope. So, if you find yourself doing what I'm doing, where I'm just like stabbing in the dark, I'm just trying to find the solution that works, like that is, I think, a normal place to be for CSS. I have been doing this for a long time, and I've created some very complex layouts, and I still find that this stuff's non-intuitive, and I have to sort of mess around until I get what I want. What I'm trying to do is hide this black line, and I know that it's possible. I just need to probably
layer
give.
system where you could lay the tab over.
Yeah, but that's not the problem. There we go. Okay. All right, look at that.
Yeah. So as you click it, the tab, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not perfect. There's still this wonky thing going on there, but
No, it's great.
but anyway, there's a far better, more complex solutions to making tabs look super hot, but this is gonna be this looks okay to me. Okay, so now we've got our default state, right, where we rendered this tabs thing, and we, if this was in a template, we could have decided which tab was started out selected, right? But all we have to do is take selected off of here and put it on a different one, and we should have B now look like it's a tab. Yeah? So I built this complex HTML structure and I did this CSS. So let's take a pause here before we jump to the JavaScript and let's talk about this if anyone has any questions about how these things work. Here are the styles and here's the HTML structure. Any questions about how this works? Yep.
I'm just wondering if you never call functions in your HTML documents, like you created data selected and then you're going to use JavaScript to remove that property.
Sure.
You could have said tabs content display none or display yes or whatever it is with a function, but you didn't do it that way. I'm wondering if you just
Well, I haven't done any JavaScript here.
Yeah, I know. I just mean you're going to do JavaScript, right? In
Yeah.
order to take that data selected and remove it. Or
Yeah.
there's no way to do that except with JavaScript.
Correct. Yeah.
You don't want to do it by hand. So I'm just wondering.
What do you mean by hand?
You haven't written the JavaScript yet.
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
able to do the tabs. Right?
Correct. Correct.
So I'm just saying that when you do write the JavaScript, you're going to remove or put on the data selected property on the buttons in order to display the content. And you did it that way. You put a property called data selected, and then you built that out. But you could have just said tab content display none.
Sure. I mean, I could have put an inline style in here and just said style equals display none, and then used JavaScript to flip that style. But the reason I didn't do that is because I want to keep clear lines between my HTML, my CSS, and my JavaScript. I don't want those getting muddied together, right? So in my HTML, I just say this element is selected. And I don't really care what that means from a CSS standpoint. Does that mean it's displayed or not, or it's a different color? I don't care. It's just a tag. It's a state, right? What the implications of that state are handled in my style sheet, and they're blind to my HTML as much as possible. And they will be in my blind to my JavaScript as well. I'm just going to take on and off that state of selected, and what that means in terms of displayed, I want to know as little bit about that as I can, because I don't want those things tied together as I want them tied together as little as possible, because it's just simpler that way. Yeah.
But also, I'm wondering, like tab content is set to display none, right, inside the CSS document.
Correct.
And if I set that to not display none, but instead display
block
block, it would show the thing. So within JavaScript, you can just grab tab content and then change or unchange the display simply.
Yes.
Instead of creating this whole new selector. So I'm just wondering why, instead of within JavaScript contacting that one property, you create this other property. And I'm wondering if that's
because
like a customary way to do it. We should always do that.
I like to keep separation between my JavaScript and my HTML and my CSS. So I would rather have a new attribute or new class name that gives a name and a description to the thing that I'm talking about. So selected is what I'm talking about here, right? The concept of a tab and its content being selected or not selected, that's now like a mental model concept, right? My JavaScript doesn't need to know what that means. It doesn't need to know that that means display none or display block. It just needs to know when you click on tab C is selected. And that's it. And it's very simple and ignorant of what selected actually does in terms of what is displayed on the screen, right? So I like to keep the different pieces of, this is true in my programming as well, just in plain, pure JavaScript or whatever, right? I like to keep my discrete pieces as ignorant of each other as possible so that they're more modular and reusable. If I make it clear what knowledge this thing that I'm writing has, the more knowledge it has, the more brittle it is, because if two things share knowledge, my JavaScript knows that selected means display block and my CSS knows that, then I have to keep those in sync. And if I want to change one, I have to make sure I remember to change the other. And that can cause all kinds of bugs. So this concept of like knowledge is something you should pay attention to when you're building things, and try to make sure that knowledge lives in one place and not shared, duplicated in more than one place. And if it does need to be known by two things, that they pull that knowledge from the same central place, right? So we can't really do that in CSS and JavaScript. If we need to, they both need to know that we're using display none and display block to make this thing work. Then I might pay that cost. That might be okay, because it's not like I can share a function between JavaScript and CSS, right? But I can share a class name. CSS can define a class name, and JavaScript can use that class name. So my JavaScript can be ignorant of what that class name does, and I just toggle that class name, right? So to me, that makes simpler code that's less brittle. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Cool. Cool. All right, so let's get into some JavaScript. I'm going to go get jQuery CDN because I'm going to use some jQuery. And I'm going to make sure I put the jQuery script tag before my script tag so that I can use it, because order matters. So now in here, I can say, I'm going to actually, there's two ways you can do this. You could wait for, okay, the simplest approach if you were just reading the docs is you'd want to do something like this, where you say, okay, if anybody clicks on any element that matches this CSS selector, if anyone clicks on that, we want to do something. So we're going to say tab was clicked, and then log the event.target target.inner text. And this is not going to work. I'm clicking on these things and it is not doing it. Does anyone know why this doesn't work? Because if I go copy this and I paste it in here, now it works. So why didn't it work in that file, but it works if I run it in the console? Does anyone know?
Have you included the JavaScript file in your HTML?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It said hello from index.js, so this is getting run. It does have everything to do with document ready. Can you explain more?
You can do it.
I know there's a document ready in the window. I think after the document loads.
Yeah, that's basically it, right? So if we look at our HTML page here, right, the browser's receiving this text as the response to the GET request it made to our HTTP server. And as it's being streamed, it's like a fax coming out of a fax machine. You're trying to draw on the screen as fast as you can. So it says, okay, there's a style sheet, go get that. There's another style sheet, go get that. There's these two JavaScripts, go get those, right? And so it's going to go get jQuery and execute it before it gets down to this next line. And then it's going to go get this file, so more HTTP requests. And then it's going to start executing this. But it hasn't gotten this content yet. So when this code is executed, this returns 0 elements. There are no elements on the page that match this CSS selector at the time. And I'll illustrate that. And I'm just going to log the length of the jQuery response. And you'll see it's 0. Okay? There's two ways to solve this. You can take your script and put it at the bottom of your file, the bottom of the body. And now it works, because it had already gotten that content. So that's one way people solve this. I'm not honestly, every time I look up like what's the best practice here, it switches and you hear a lot of and you can do both, and there's performance trade-offs, but now we're getting into super hyper optimizing page rendering time. So we're not going to do that, but I'm going to put it back up here so I can show you the other way, which is you wait for the document to be ready. So in jQuery, you can do document dot ready and provide it a function, and then put your code inside of there. And now, that did not work. Oh, this needs to be in there for that. So now it works and we're getting, okay. The shorthand for this is just pass a function to the jQuery $sign function. That's the shorthand. So it should be super easy for you to say, like, wait for the document to be ready, then do all these things. Okay? So there's a third way to do this, though. There's a third way to do this, which is known as event delegation. So rather than doing what we're doing here, which is go find all the tabs that are on the page right now, and for each one, bind a click handler, right? If we were to be making dynamic web pages where we're adding tabs and removing tabs, and they don't all exist when the page loads, or we want to be able to hook up an event handler before the DOM is ready, we can use event delegation. And so it looks a little bit like this, where you just say, you just take this CSS selector and you move it, and you say, put this on the element. Sorry, this is the same as saying on click, which is the syntax I meant to use. So I'll do that over here on click. And so here we're saying go find all these. It's going to find 3. And for each of those, bind a click handler. What this is saying bind a click event to the document, but only fire this if the target matches the CSS selector. So every single click is going to be captured by the document, and it's going to look and say, did the target of that click match the CSS selector? If so, then run this, right? So now we don't need to wait for the DOM to be ready, and we can click on these tabs, and it knows which element was clicked on. And I can click on other stuff, and it's not going to do that. Yeah.
And that overrides the placement of the script in the HTML?
It's not an override. It has nothing to do with the placement. If we put this log back, you'll still see there are no tabs on the page at the time. There are 0 when we hooked this up. But there's a document. And so if we put one click handler on the document, all the clicks will bubble up. Is everybody familiar with event bubbling in the DOM? Okay. So it's the longest lecture ever.
I'm like, yeah, I videoed it.
So look, if you click this element, a click event happens, okay? And it'll look for any handlers bound to this element, and if there are some, it'll fire them, just like we did a moment ago. But then that's also a click on the LI, and it's also a click on the UL and the header and the body and the document. So if you picture each of these squares as sheets of paper, every time you click, you like stab through all the paper, right? You click the element and its parent and its parent and its parent, and it travels all the way at the top. Most events will bubble. Not all events will bubble, but most events will. So if I want to know if a button with this class was clicked, I can just listen to every single click that'll eventually get to the top of the document through bubbling. And then I look at the target and I say, do you match this pattern? If so. So it's like an extra layer on top of an event handler, and it's called event delegation. So anyway, there's 3 ways to hook them up. I'm going to use event delegation to make these tabs work. So this basically just means if I click on an element that matches this CSS selector, call this handler. Is that enough to go forward on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. When that.
Any
when
questions?
that's
Yeah.
just- And I guess, I mean, it's awesome that so. Just the click happening, it's not an override, but just the click happening, because it's a document, when you click, it just, I mean, it makes it live. Like, so it puts it in the hand of the click itself and not whether or not the document is ready.
I didn't understand. Can you try
Okay,
to say that again?
We were talking about how the HTML gets rendered back, right? And so it's going to go like this,
top to bottom.
Right, top
Yeah.
to bottom, right? And so you using event delegation is like, I guess it would have to be ready.
No, the DOM is not ready at this time. Here, I'll put this back, and I'll log when the DOM is ready. There's going to be 2 looking for tabs here. So this was pre-DOM ready. Right after this, we bound to the document. The document always exists. In JavaScript, you won't be able to execute JavaScript before the document exists. So you'll always be able to bind to the top of the DOM tree to listen to events that bubble. So that's what we're doing, is we're saying before even any HTML is parsed and rendered, if the document receives a click event for an element matching the CSS selector, fire this handler, right? And so the tabs don't exist yet, but in a moment they will, and then someone will be able to click on them, and our handler's already set up. Yeah? So this also means that there won't be a time at which a tab has been rendered, but the DOM's not ready, and someone could click, right? So in the case of a very slow page load, our handler is going to be hooked up before anything's rendered. So that's again a hyper optimization none of us really need to be worried about. But that should give you clarity on the order of operations. Yeah.
I'm a little confused about that $sign function. That's a jQuery specific thing.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Allows you to be able to do event.
Have you not used jQuery before?
I have not used jQuery.
Okay.
So,
This is gonna be, yeah.
But the document would make sense because I've done bubbling before, but I don't understand quite like the $sign.
There's a lot of
Not that one. No, I'm sorry, not that one. The one down there, the like gets in the self-executing.
No, it's not. You're just passing a function to a function.
Okay, that's a jQuery specific thing.
The $sign is just a function,
Yeah.
like any other function. It's not weird. It just has a weird name.
So
right?
I'm confused about why that makes it so that it is.
This is shorthand for, and this is just special syntax to jQuery. So there's nothing to learn here except through how jQuery decided to make their API work. So when you pass a function to the $, it means run this function when the DOM is ready.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's just through documentation. You can know that.
Okay. You pass the function to the $sign function. It says only once the document.
Yeah, this is shorthand for. So I'll leave it there just so it's more clear.
It just looks like the syntax. So it is an iffy or it isn't an iffy?
It's not an iffy.
Okay, it just looks like one.
It just looks weird. Yeah. It's just like this is a function and you're passing a function to it, just like if this was each or for each, right? Same deal, passing a function to a function. Yeah.
And it would only be an issue for your both.
Correct.
Well, see, that's
Correct.
What, yeah, that's what I was looking at.
So if this happens to look pretty similar to this, right? It's just you got to be able to see the difference.
Okay.
Yes.
What about putting the script tag instead of at the top of your HTML page, at the bottom of your HTML page?
We did that.
Oh, we did, and it still was having problems?
No, it would have worked fine.
Oh, that's another way of
Yeah.
solving that.
I showed you like 4 ways to solve this problem. Yeah. Cool.
So now you succeeded. We're super confused. No, I'm just kidding.
Great. All right. So now you want to delete everything and start over. That's usually how I. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, right? But no, but on the truth, sometimes some stuff I tried to find.
All right. All right, we're almost done with these tabs. So
Yes, change.org. That's my.
You gotta change every 6 months.
yeah. Okay. So now let's put our log back here and let's comment this out and comment this out. Okay. So now when I click on tab C, it tells me which tabs I've clicked on. So
And how many times?
sure, yeah. That's just in the console. If you log the same thing twice, it just doesn't
Okay.
flood the screen, right?
Oh, yes, I know.
What's happening? My computer just totally locked up. What?
Maybe too many clicks, maybe.
Yeah, too many clicks. Like, what?
Wow, all right. Well, like, it's so weird because the force click is not working either. You just got a full crash. But, like, that just moved.
Yeah. Dang.
Man, am I gonna have to stitch videos together? It's gonna suck. Oh no, it should still be recording. Okay, share my screen. All right, sorry about that. I lost everything. Okay, cool. So let's quickly finish this up. So in our JavaScript, we know when something is clicked, right? So looking at our HTML, what is our task? If I click tab C, what are the steps that have to happen in order for us to switch to tab C?
I want to show the content.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, so here is, so if we want to switch to tab C manually, I can come down here and remove data selected and move down here. And then I have to do the same thing on this sister element down here. Did I mess that up? I did. This is tab A, this is tab B, and this is tab C. And we have to put this here, right? So I just have to move those two attributes. I have to remove them from what they're on now, and I have to move them. So I'm going to start with the event target, which is my button. And I'm going to go up to the closest tabs element. So jQuery's closest is going to just look at your parents, your ancestors, and find the one that's closest. So if I click on any three of these buttons, I'm going to walk up the DOM tree from this button up to the tabs. And that gets me to the outermost element that wraps my whole component, right? So this is the tabs node. And now I'm going to say find all the tabs tab. And we're going to remove the attribute data selected. And then on my specific tab node, we're going to add back, or if we're just going to add the attribute selected. So we're gonna be removing it from all three and then adding it to the other one. Make sense?
It's like the same concept when you want to switch. But, I think one time at an array, you have to like switch places of elements. You just do like 3 steps of.
That's a little bit different where you're like, you take A and store it in B, and then you make B equal A. You know what I mean? Like you do that sort of swappy thing.
Steps, yeah.
This is, I guess it's kind of like that. Oh, but it's not adding our data select, or no, it's not removing data selected. jQuery remove adder attribute. There's a remove adder, great. Remove adder. So let's try it again. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, it's not adding the attribute now. Oh, this is the wrong thing. I want the event target. So const clicked tab equals the event target. And then this can become clicked tab. And then down here, there we go. So it works for the tabs. Yeah?
Yeah.
And now we just got to switch. So I gave this other attribute, data tab, to give it like a sort of ID or a name to that tab, right? So we know the clicked tabs data tab is going to give us the ID of the tab. It's not a real ID. It's just I'm calling it a tab ID. Or maybe we'll call it a tab name or something like that. Yeah? So then we can use that to, from the tabs node, find the matching content element where data-tab equals, and we'll just splice in here the tab name. So we're dynamically creating a CSS selector that's going to find our tab content node. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do tab nodes, find all of these, and remove matter data selected. And then the node that matches, we're going to just put back on data selected. Let's see if that works. Boop, there we go. One more thing I want to do, which is a tabs tab has an outline of node. There we go. And we made tabs.
Are you still recording, by the way?
Yeah, it should still be recording.
Just the last step from like line 12 to 16.
Okay. So here we get the outermost component that wraps, or not component, node that wraps our entire component. Get all the tab. Oh no, that's what this does. This is get the tab that was selected or / clicked on. And then this goes from there up to the one that wraps our entire component. And then this removes selected state from all tabs. And then this adds selected state to the clicked tab. Yeah? This gets the unique tab name from the clicked tab. And this removes selected state from all content tab content nodes. And then this adds selected, oh no, this remove, this, we can move this down here. This gets the tab content for the selected tab, and then that goes there. This goes here, and then this add selected state to the matching content node for the selected tab. Does that help?
Right?
All right. Hour and 40 minutes.
That was
for
good.
that.
That was good.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll post this code in the video when I get it up there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.